So, looking at our second reading from God and Man at Yale, looking at the beginning of the second reading, chapter 3, Yale and her alumni, quite an interesting point is made, especially as we look back on this book written in 1951. Uh, we know Buckley's basic argument from the preface to the book, and that is that because the Board of Trustees of Yale and the vast majority of the alumni of Yale believe in Christian principles and principles of individualism as opposed to collectivism in economic life, especially, that Yale itself, as an educational institution, mostly through its teachers, but through other means, is bound by that to fulfill the wishes, the presumed wishes of the Board of Trustees and the alumni to promote those values, or at least not to undermine them. That is, the values, not so much of you have to be a believing Christian, but rather Christian ethics, Christian principles, Christian values, and the values of um, basically free market business capitalism. And that is I think that is the root, again, of Buckley's argument. That is, he certainly believes that a university in itself should promote these things. But that is his personal belief. His argument rests on the idea that the university has a responsibility to promote that worldview, the worldview of Christianity and individualism as Buckley sees it, because it has a duty to fulfill the wishes of the people who actually run the university and determine its mission, and that is, again, the Board of Trustees and the alumni. And so, in the beginning of the second reading, in the beginning of chapter 3 here, he makes a very interesting point. And his point really is something that undermines his point, and that is, if Yale is producing now different sorts of people under the influence of, according to Buckley, atheism and secularism and collectivism, then this situation in which there's a disconnect between the Board of Trustees and the alumni on one side and the actual teaching of the university on the other, this will cease to exist because the people who are coming out of Yale now, influenced by their so-called atheist collectivist education, they'll be the alumni and they'll be the Board of Trustees in the future, and there will be no disconnect because they will think like they're what's going on at Yale in the classroom. That is, they will be people, unlike the present generation of alumni and Board of Trustees, they will be people who will approve of the collectivist and secularist point of view. So it's quite an interesting point, right? That is, I think he must recognize that he's kind of swimming against the tide, and that this book that he's writing, if it has any credibility in terms of pointing out a failure of Yale to fulfill its duty to the Board of Trustees and the alumni, at this point is transitory. That is, it's changing, and that in not a few years it will no longer apply because there will no longer be such a disconnect for the reasons that he sets out. So his point here is, well, we've got to do something now, right, to change Yale and to change the kind of teaching that it does and the kind of worldview that it promotes and the kind of values that it promotes. We've got to change it now, or it will be too late. I think he's entirely right in that respect because that's what happened. I mean, I think it just absolutely, to my mind, strains credibility to think that the Board of Trustees and the alumni, the majority of the alumni at Yale, think that Yale should promote Christian and individualist values. I may be wrong about that. There's certainly some of them who do. But I think the days when Buckley could comfortably assume that the majority of them did, that those days are long over. So I guess in terms of Yale itself, or a typical elite educational institution like Yale, I think that Buckley is sort of admitting that, almost admitting here, that he's bound to fail. Quite interesting.